the remote McPherson farm in northern Australia. 7 years of silence were interrupted by a chance doctor's visit. Behind a slate fence, bone fragments were found that would change the fate of all residents. 3 dates, 3 mysterious disappearances that only outsiders noticed, but the local community stubbornly ignored. Now this case can no longer be hidden. Too many coincidences and matches that can no longer be explained with simple logic. 7:43 in the morning. A small airfield in Red Dust Cove, surrounded by lifeless desert landscape. Jonathan Kane, doctor of the Royal Air Rescue Service, waits patiently for landing permission for the medical aircraft. The sun, which has not yet risen high, colors the horizon dust orange. Kane decides to seek shelter from the sun by an old slate fence that surrounds the McPherson farm. In the twilight behind the fence, the doctor's gaze accidentally notices small whitish pieces, like animal bones bleached by the sun. Such finds are common in this area and normally disturb no one. Kane, however, is disturbed by their size and unusual appearance. Too fragile, too small. A feeling of unease arises immediately and prompts Kane to remember the location. He walks away and tries to convince himself that these are only trifles, but the disturbing thoughts no longer leave him. In the evening of the same day, he reports his suspicions to the local authorities, and this simple, almost accidental encounter sets in motion a chain of events that will forever change the fate of the McPherson family. Several hours later, police officers and forensic technicians arrive at the farm. The first examinations immediately confirmed that the doctor was right with his suspicions. In the ashes of an old smokehouse, small bone fragments and 8 tooth buds are discovered, partially damaged by fire. The forensic laboratory in Darwin, which confirms the data after 3 days, reports that the remains belong to very young people who were only recently brought into the world. The investigation begins searching for additional evidence, and almost immediately it appears. On the wall in the back room of the McPherson family house hang 3 cloth bracelets with embroidered dates. 18th of February, 17, 3rd of June, 20, 27th of January, 24. These numbers are initially perceived simply as curiosities, but checking the farm's satellite communication log shows a strange coincidence. Exactly on these dates, the connection to the outside world was completely interrupted for exactly 36 hours. The investigation focuses on 2 people. Claire McPherson, 34 years old, mother of the family. A woman who in recent years had practically stopped communicating with anyone outside the farm. Neighbors describe her as a quiet, almost mute figure who appears in public rarely and reluctantly. Her status is noted as active suspect. The second name is Duncan McPherson, an older man and the family's de facto head. Even less is known about him. Neighbors practically do not remember cases when he left the farm and preferred to lead a closed, completely isolated life. Duncan's status is briefly determined by the investigators as in the shadows. One of the first doctors who examined the crime scene expressed the assumption of an attack by wild dogs. Hair tufts were found on the bone remains, which confirmed such a version. The police initially leaned toward exactly this version. The animals here are large, dangerous, and attacks on people have occurred before. Very soon, however, the investigation understands that everything here is more complicated than it appears at first glance. The remains look too clean, as if someone had carefully and accurately ensured to hide all possible evidence. The preliminary report from the forensic laboratory received after 2 days drastically changes the direction of the investigation. Traces of lye were discovered on the remains. This fact completely excludes an animal attack, since such traces can only appear as a result of targeted human intervention. The major crime squad immediately requests an urgent search warrant for the McPherson farm premises. From this moment on, the police practically have no time for thinking and hesitation. The suspects have a chance to destroy the remaining evidence. Claire McPherson, 30 years old, in custody. 3 mysterious disappearances. accident or calculated action. 2 days have passed since the police officially arrested Claire McPherson. The interrogation room in the Darwin police station is a small and austere room with walls covered in faded grey paint. In 2 days, nothing has changed here. Only the faces of the police officers have changed, and stacks of papers on the table have been added. Claire keeps herself distant, almost indifferent. In the past 24 hours, she has not even asked for food or water, but waits calmly for the investigators' questions. In the woman's face, only fatigue and inscrutability can be read, but she shows no obvious signs of remorse or excitement. Inspector Sam Barton carefully studies the papers before him. Among them are the final data from the forensic laboratory in Darwin, which confirm that the found bone remains and tooth buds belong to Claire's maternal relatives. This fact is now fully confirmed, and Claire no longer denies her connection to the found fragments. To the inspector's question about the origin of the remains, Claire answers calmly and measuredly. According to her words, all 3 whose remains were found on the farm were already born dead. She claims that she simply buried them as she could, without involving anyone from the family. Her voice sounds convincing, but the investigators notice an important detail. The woman shows not the slightest excitement or grief when telling about such a severe experience. Her answers are perceived as memorized and formal, as if they had been repeated many times before this day. Nevertheless, the investigators doubt her story. The technical examination shows that Claire could hardly have been physically capable of transporting a load of about 3 kilograms over a distance of 28 meters to the burial site, especially considering her physical condition. Immediately after birth, calculations show a low probability that such manipulation could have been performed by her without the help of another person. This prompts the police to assume that someone from the family could have been an accomplice, or at least a witness to these events. At this point, Claire changes her version and mentions that wild dogs, dingoes, regularly appear near the farm, and refers to Ranger Steve Long. She reports that she heard from him about cases where animals could steal and drag away everything that was poorly secured, including remains. From her side, this sounds more like an attempt to find some explanation for what happened, rather than an intentional accusation of a specific person. The police check this version and immediately go to a meeting with Ranger Steve Long, a local Aboriginal who maintains order in the remote areas of the district. Steve, who has long been familiar with the area and its peculiarities, confirms that dingoes do indeed occur frequently in this part of the land. However, he confidently explains that he was in a completely different location on the night of the disappearance on the 27th of January 2024. Confirmation of the ranger's alibi comes practically immediately. The GPS log, confiscated from Steve Long's service vehicle Toyota Land Cruiser, shows that the ranger was 42 kilometers away from the McPherson farm that night. This completely excludes his involvement and participation in the events mentioned by Claire. Thus, Claire's attempt to explain the disappearances through the intervention of wild animals and somehow involve the ranger proved unsuccessful. Long, who was previously at the center of the investigation's attention, is now completely excluded from the list of possible suspects. After excluding the ranger from the number of suspects, the investigation changes its focus. The police's attention turns to Claire's husband, Ewan McPherson, who until now has practically not been mentioned in the official protocols. His role in the events remains unclear so far, but checking his alibi and his technical means now becomes the investigation's priority task. The further direction of the investigation will largely depend on his statements and behavior. Ewan McPherson, Claire's husband, remains at the center of the investigation's attention. He claims that on the night of the last disappearance, he was busy repairing a solar inverter. But is his story true? On the morning of the 19th of May, investigators return to the McPherson farm. This time, the goal is clear. They must thoroughly check the words of Ewan McPherson, Claire's husband. Ewan, a 35-year-old man of medium height, receives the police silently without trying to hide his tension. He knows that attention is now focused on him, Ewan confidently explains that during the last incident, which took place on the 27th of January, he was on the farm and busy repairing the solar system inverter. According to his words, the equipment gave an error, and he manually shut down the inverter to perform the necessary repair. The investigators check this claim in detail and find disturbing inconsistencies. The police confiscate the log journal from the Victron inverter device, which automatically records every action with it. The records say the complete opposite. On the dates specified by Ewan, the inverter was not simply temporarily shut down due to a malfunction. The log recorded that the device was manually shut off for exactly 36 hours. Records of malfunctions or repairs are completely absent. Ewan's statements begin to look openly dubious. At the same time, forensic technicians find another key piece of evidence in a side room of the farm, on a bucket in which 5 kilograms of sodium hydroxide are discovered. Tape is found with a clearly preserved saliva trace from Ewan McPherson. The presence of his saliva on the bucket lid is no longer a coincidence, but a direct indication of his active participation in the events. Ewan is forced to admit to purchasing the lie. During interrogation, he explains its acquisition by the necessity of regular cleaning of water pipes. Ewan claims that the farm is old, the pipes constantly clog, and lye was recommended to him as a cleaning agent. To confirm his words, he presents a receipt from a store in Alice Springs from the 2nd of June 2020. However, the investigators have already examined the farm and know that all water pipes on the property are made of polyethylene and partly of flexible hoses. These are materials for which the use of lye is not only pointless, but also destructive. This means that Ewan's explanation about the purpose of the chemical is completely untenable. On the same day, investigators receive unexpected testimony from Ewan's third-degree cousin, who lives in a neighboring settlement. The woman claims that she heard from Ewan himself about using lye for disposing of goat carcasses on the farm. She is certain that he did this exclusively for cost reasons for the official procedure of destroying animal remains. At first glance, the version seems convincing and worth checking. Soon, however, a new, much more important fact is discovered that overturns the sisters' version. During a thorough examination of the farm in a barn, hidden behind a pile of old boards and metal scrap, investigators find a large plastic bucket with a volume of 20 liters. Forensic experts immediately notice suspicious traces on the inner walls. Subsequent analyses show a clear result. Mixed blood traces of Claire McPherson and someone very young are found on the bucket, the one whose remains were discovered earlier. This evidence becomes the decisive argument that refutes the story about animal disposal. Now the police know exactly that Ewan not only participated but also actively used chemicals, obviously not for household purposes. It becomes obvious that the events on the McPherson farm are not coincidental and not a domestic tragedy. The investigation enters a new phase. Now all efforts are directed at understanding the figure of family elder Duncan McPherson. It is he, the older family member, the person who constantly remains in the shadows, who now attracts maximum attention from the investigation. In his past may be hidden answers to many questions that remain without explanation so far. In the depths of the McPherson farm, a new discovery completely changes the scale of what happened. Who is behind it? On the morning of the 20th of May, tense silence reigns on the McPherson farm. The investigators of the Major Crime Squad, fully aware of the severity of the evidence against Ewan, expand the search circle. Now their attention focuses on another location, the compost pit located in the farm's backyard. This place, seemingly completely ordinary for rural areas, had remained unnoticed until now. The initial soil check leads investigators to completely open the pit. After several hours of work, at a depth of about 2 meters, a dense layer of charcoal is discovered, dated to about 2017. And right behind it, hidden in the soil blackened by time, bone remains appear that obviously belong to several very young beings. Their number immediately makes the police officers freeze. It becomes obvious that the scale of what happened here is much larger than previously assumed. The forensic group immediately conducts a rapid test of the soil and bones with a special chemical indicator phosphocheck. The test immediately shows a high content of phosphates and nitrogen, a clear chemical marker for protein combustion. Thus, the suspicion that the remains were intentionally burned becomes an indisputable fact. The events of 2017 now also become a key episode of the investigation. For investigators, this means that the McPhersons have hidden not only the most recent events, but also much earlier tragedies. At the same time, the investigation manages to find a completely new witness, a pilot of the Air Rescue Service who had worked this route back in February 2017. The man who recently retired willingly tells police the details of that strange day. According to him, the flight ordered for urgent medical assistance on the McPherson farm was suddenly cancelled by the client himself, although the weather was clear and conditions for the flight were ideal. This fact is documented and arouses particular suspicion among investigators. Investigators quickly check the weather conditions of that day by contacting a volunteer meteorologist who kept a weather diary in Red Dust Cove. The man confirms that visibility was excellent, more than 10 kilometers, and there were no weather obstacles for the medical aircraft. This means only one thing. The cancellation of the call was made intentionally to prevent the appearance of outsiders on the farm exactly on that day. Thus, it becomes clear that the McPhersons' attempts to hide what happened began much earlier and were much more thought out than previously assumed. Additionally, a thorough examination is conducted of all found bone remains, which according to early statements allegedly could have been carried away by wild animals. The forensic pathologist, who carefully examined the found fragments, definitively rejects this version. According to the official report, no traces of bites or impact from animal teeth were found on any sample. All damage without exception bears the character of thermal impact. The question of dingoes is closed once and for all. On the same morning, police finally reach the family elder, Duncan McPherson. His living space is searched particularly thoroughly. Among Duncan's personal belongings, investigators find a laptop on whose desktop a PDF file named Right of First Flesh V2 is saved. The document is opened and studied very superficially to avoid excessive details. But even a cursory glance allows police to understand that this text is obviously connected to the events taking place on the farm. From this moment, Duncan officially becomes a suspect. Now the main task of the investigations is examining Duncan McPherson's personality and clarifying his role in what happened. Until now, Duncan had been in the shadows and avoided police attention. Now his past and ideology must be examined most thoroughly. This determines how deep the investigations will go and whether it will be possible to uncover the full extent of what happened on the McPherson farm. Duncan McPherson, 62 years old, was arrested. The main question of the investigations: how did this man subjugate the entire family? In the early morning of the 21st of May, Duncan McPherson crosses the threshold of the Darwin police station for the first time. This older man, who had previously been an inconspicuous figure in the case, now appears calm and reserved. From the beginning, he does not try to deny his role in family life, but his answers are extremely careful and thoughtfully considered. For the investigators, it is obvious that Duncan is a complex person and obviously knows how to keep emotions under control. In the office of police analysts lie the results of examining the document found on Duncan's laptop, the file named Right of First Flesh V2. This text, despite partially censored fragments, clearly shows that Duncan created the ideological justification for what happened in the family. But the investigations do not fully reveal this yet, but strive to understand more through Duncan himself. At the same time, analysts find an old diary of Duncan McPherson, still dated 1998, 26 years before today's events. Among numerous everyday records, there is one that stands out for its strangeness and frightening imagery. He mentions that smoke from a very young being is allegedly capable of extending the breath of the old shepherd. At this point, the investigations understand. The idea that Duncan later began to use has deep roots and was formulated long before the events of recent years. An additional check of Duncan's past leads to a witness from 2002, a local veterinarian. He informs the police that Duncan was already applying strange methods on the farm at the beginning of the 2000s. He smoked small billy goats and explained this with an alleged medical purpose. At that time, no importance was attached to this, and it was considered a strange but relatively harmless quirk of the older farmer. Now everything looks different. Of particular interest to the investigations is the construction of the compost pit itself, which was factually converted into a huge smoking chamber. When investigators request documents for its construction, it quickly turns out that the pit was erected shortly before the beginning of the first known events. A receipt from the company Catherine Bricks from 2016 shows the purchase of 600 fireproof bricks. These bricks were actually available on the Australian market in the specified period, and Duncan does not deny their acquisition. However, he does not explain the true purpose of such a large amount of specialized material. The investigations quickly notice an important detail. The purchase date of the bricks coincides with Claire's first pregnancy. Now the picture gradually begins to come together. Duncan obviously prepared in advance for the events, planned and prepared the technical basis long before the beginning of the first documented episode. Duncan's lawyer, who is present at all interrogations, tries to direct the investigators' attention in another direction. He officially explains that the smoking pit was used exclusively for processing and smoking agricultural livestock. This explanation sounds plausible. The McPherson farm indeed kept many animals, and at first glance the lawyer's words have a right to exist. However, the investigators already know that the simple explanation does not match the facts previously established at the crime scene. Now firm evidence is required that could definitively refute this version. The solution comes quickly. A portable X-ray fluorescence analyzer is sent to the farm by forensic technicians, which makes it possible to examine the chemical composition of the brick masonry in detail. The analysis results are extremely clear. Microparticles of phosphate and calcium are discovered on the bricks, typical residues that arise exclusively from contact with human remains. No agricultural application can have such traces. The lawyer's false version about using the smoking pit for animals collapses under the pressure of this direct scientific evidence. After these findings and evidence, the investigations understand Duncan's role is not limited only to technical participation or simple family leadership. He was obviously engaged in systematic preparation of events, using beliefs deeply implanted in the family's consciousness. Now it is time to examine the psychological aspect more closely. How exactly could Claire and the other family members fall under such strong influence from Duncan, and how did this influence function for years? The city weakens the blood was the main legend of the McPherson family. But how did fear of banishment become the main instrument of control over Claire? On the morning of the 23rd of May, investigators receive important evidence that sheds light on the psychological state of Claire McPherson, the central figure of the investigations. Among the many papers previously confiscated from the McPherson house, a letter is discovered that Claire had sent to her sister back in 2019. In this short and desperate letter, Claire confesses to her sister that if she should not be able to undergo a certain mysterious rite, her life, according to her deep conviction, would end before she turns 30. These words sound threatening, but explain much of what earlier seemed completely inexplicable. For the first time, investigators see clearly that precisely fear of mythical punishment could prevent Claire from fleeing or asking for help. Now it is obvious. Duncan's control over her is not only cruel, but also carefully thought out. For further understanding of the situation, the police invite an experienced psychologist who specializes in cases of sectarian influence. After detailed analysis of letters, statements, and Claire's behavior, the psychologist draws a clear conclusion. The woman shows pronounced signs of dependent disorder, characteristic of people who have been subjected to cult control for years. The psychologist explains to investigators that such influence is achieved through long-term and systematic consciousness processing based on fear of isolation and banishment from the community. In Claire's case, fear of the possibility of finding herself in the city, where according to family legend, blood becomes weaker, became absolute and overwhelming. Now it is important for investigators to understand to what extent Claire herself recognized the gravity of her actions. According to the results of expertise from psychologists and psychiatrists provided to the investigations, it becomes clear Claire indeed acted under strongest influence and pressure from the family elder. However, the report emphasizes that the woman fully understood the consequences of her actions and could evaluate them within the framework of reality. This means that despite the pressure, Claire is not completely freed from responsibility. The police now clearly sees before them a person who was simultaneously victim and participant in the crimes. This ambiguity significantly complicates further actions of the investigations and decision-making. In response to these conclusions, Claire's lawyer insists on the version of postpartum psychosis. The defense tries to prove that the woman did not recognize her actions and could not be conscious due to the extremely severe psychological condition caused by childbirth. Although this explanation has formal right to exist, the data from psychiatric evaluations already available significantly weaken this version. Investigators understand that this trail can only be definitively rejected or confirmed after deeper medical examinations. However, at this moment, another important testimony appears that completely changes the view of the case. During examination of the satellite message journal from the Iridium modem of the McPherson farm from the 26th of January 2024, a short SMS from Claire to Duncan is discovered. The text is laconic and clear. "I am ready. For us." For investigators, this message becomes the most important evidence confirming the conscious nature of her actions and the presence of intent. Now, it is already impossible to perceive Claire only as a passive victim of circumstances. She obviously participated in planning and carrying out everything that happened on the farm. Although the degree of her awareness and subjugation continues to require further analysis. After discovering this text message, the police begin investigating the history of purchasing and using obstetric sets that were regularly bought by the McPherson family. This line of investigation leads to the local agricultural cooperative Red Dust Agricultural. The investigators intend to find out who and when exactly acquired the medical complexes and to what extent this is connected with the events on the McPherson farm. An unexpected piece of evidence from the past sheds light on the involvement of outsiders. Who was hiding behind the purchase of medical materials? In the early morning of the 25th of May, an unexpected message from an unknown sender arrives at the Darwin police station. It contains a photo of an invoice for obstetric set number 200-29 from 2020. The accountant's signature on the document is clearly visible. Ross Moss. This name appears for the first time during the course of the investigation, and for the police, this becomes a signal. It's time to look more closely at a person who had not previously appeared in any way in the case materials. The investigators begin a check and quickly establish that Ross Moss is a former member of the McPherson community. He left it in 2021 and had lived separately since then, avoiding contact with the family. The investigation quickly manages to locate him and call him for questioning. During the conversation with police, Ross Moss agrees to tell his version of events. He confirms that he belonged to the community and performed accounting functions, particularly organizing the purchase of medical and chemical materials. According to his words, however, Duncan McPherson personally told him strange things that seemed disturbing to Ross even then. Allegedly, it was considered a great sin not to share the flesh of the firstborn. Meanwhile, Moss insists that he didn't take these words literally at the time and couldn't foresee the true consequences of these purchases. Parallel to Moss's testimony, the police conduct an audit of Red Dust Agricultural Company, through which the payments were made. The ASIC audit confirms that this cooperative was actually a shell company. Through the account at Catherine Bank, payments were made not only for medical sets but also for chemicals, including sodium hydroxide and acacia extract. The investigators are directly interested in whether Ross Moss was informed about the purpose of these purchases. His answer sounds convincing. Initially, he claims that he absolutely knew nothing and believed it was only about hidden home births, which are common in rural communities of Australia. Soon, however, his words are doubted. On the flash drive that was confiscated from him on the day of his arrest and immediately sealed with SHA 256 hash, correspondence is discovered in which Moss personally discussed details of lie purchases. The messages contained instructions about the urgency of delivery immediately after birth, which obviously testified to his understanding of the specifics of the situation. Now it becomes clear that Moss knew more than he previously admitted. He was not just an accountant, but an important link in the supply chain for materials used in the crimes on the McPherson farm. Ross Moss tries to present himself as a person who is too small and insignificant to understand the true intentions of Duncan and the McPherson family. He says that he saw himself only as an ordinary executor who was obligated to follow the instructions of senior community members. The investigators note this version attentively. However, it is already clear that the degree of Moss's awareness was significantly higher than he tries to show. Nevertheless, it is important to emphasize at this point that Moss's role is not central or leading. He was not an ideologist. Rather, his functions were of a practical character. The most important evidence appears on the same day when forensic specialists thoroughly examined the electronic spreadsheets confiscated from Ross Moss. Among them, a note is discovered. FF window 36. When checking the data and comparing it with the journals of the Iridium satellite communication operator, it becomes clear that the time frame indicated in the spreadsheet completely matches the already known 36-hour periods of communication interruption at the McPherson farm. This evidence clearly proves that Moss not only knew the facts themselves, but also the exact time of the occurring events. From this moment, Ross Moss officially changes to the status of a prosecution witness. He no longer tries to deny his knowledge of the circumstances, as he understands that further resistance is pointless. With Moss's appearance and his testimony, the investigation finally receives the key to the direct involvement of each of the three main figures: Claire, Ewan, and Duncan. Now the police are preparing to move to analysis of video materials that should record their immediate involvement and finally confirm the degree of responsibility of each individual. The investigation is in the home stretch. The main question now is who exactly was the initiator: Elder Duncan, Mother Claire, or her husband Ewan McPherson? On the 28th of May, 3 days after Ross Moss's key testimony, the investigation receives new evidence that sheds light on the role of each of the three suspects. Now the main attention is directed to the personality of Ewan McPherson, who previously appeared as the least significant figure among the suspects. In the morning, police find a note in the McPherson house that was hidden among Ewan's papers and old books. The note laconically states, "Burn while warm, otherwise the spirits will cry." This text immediately evokes associations among investigators with Duncan McPherson's diary, which was previously confiscated and thoroughly examined. The police submit the note for expert analysis. On the same day, a linguistics expert gives an opinion confirming that the words from the note are absolutely identical to the stylistic and linguistic turns that Duncan used in diary entries made many years ago. This suggests that the elder not only controlled the family but also directly influenced Ewan's actions and even dictated formulations for actions to him. Ewan was obviously not an independent figure. For the investigation, it becomes important to understand who Ewan McPherson really is. Just a figure in someone else's game or a direct executor of serious actions. The psychiatrist who studied the case materials and the results of conversations with Ewan presents a clear opinion. The suspect's intellect is significantly below average, and he was under absolute suggestion from Duncan and Claire. The psychiatrist characterizes him as a guided person who is capable of executing instructions without asking questions and analyzing consequences. This explains why Ewan became a participant in serious events without offering any resistance. Meanwhile, Duncan's lawyer attempts to defend his client, claiming that the elder was never directly present during the burning of remains and consequently cannot be accused of direct involvement. According to the defense version, all actions were carried out exclusively by Ewan, and the elder bears no personal responsibility for these concrete events. However, the police already have facts that refute such claims, and soon the final evidence appears that closes all doubts about Duncan's role. On the evening of the 28th of May, police gain access to the last, decisive piece of evidence. This is a video recording from Ross Moss's mobile phone, made on the 3rd of June 2020. The video quality is sufficiently high, and the figures in the recording are easily recognizable. In the footage, it is clearly visible that exactly Duncan McPherson stands next to the smoking pit. Exactly his voice gives clear instructions to lower the bucket down. Despite the defense's claims, it is now precisely established. The elder was personally present and directed the process. This video becomes the decisive evidence that finally connects Duncan with direct involvement in the events that took place. After analyzing all the presented evidence, the police hand over the collected dossier to the Crown Prosecution Service. Now the case officially enters the phase of court trial preparation. The prosecution is convinced of the strength of the collected evidence and intends to present the court with an exhaustive picture of each suspect's involvement. On the 12th of March 2025, the final session begins in the Supreme Court of the Northern Territory in Darwin. Over several months of court hearings and careful investigative work, the picture that police painstakingly assembled from numerous facts and evidence has achieved completeness. Today, almost a year after the first shocking discoveries on the McPherson farm, the judge will announce his verdict. The courtroom is filled to the last seat, but absolute silence reigns. The suspects Duncan, Claire, and Ewan McPherson are behind a glass partition and wait silently for the announcement of the verdict. They chose a trial without a jury, which testifies to the desire to avoid excessive attention. However, public interest in this case is enormous and understandable. The crime proved to be so complex and horrific that it left traces in the consciousness of the entire region. The judge methodically counts the evidence and assembles the overall picture of the crime without superfluous comments. He confirms that the calls from the medical service RFDS to the farm were actually cancelled by the clan members themselves. All these episodes coincided with the manually performed shutdown of satellite communication via the Iridium modem, which was silenced for exactly 36 hours. Exactly this time was used to conduct rituals and the subsequent concealment of all evidence. The investigation established that Duncan McPherson built a special pit in advance in 2016 and lined it with special fireproof bricks. Its purpose was clearly determined by forensic experts using an XRF analyzer, which revealed remains of human biological material. Chemicals for concealing the remains were repeatedly purchased, and 3 times the purchase of large batches of sodium hydroxide was registered. Together with acacia wood, the chemical was used for complete destruction of all biological traces. The fabric bracelets with embroidered dates found in the family home proved to be documentary confirmation of the committed events. Each date coincided with periods of communication shutdown and the discovery of traces of remains destruction. DNA analysis established beyond doubt the belonging of the victims to the McPherson family. The key video provided by Ross Moss confirmed Duncan McPherson's direct leadership of all processes. His voice and figure are clearly visible in the recordings where he gives instructions to lower the bucket into the pit. While the judge reads the details of the crime, Duncan McPherson loses composure. His normally unshakable face suddenly contorts, and he abruptly stands up from his seat. The court bailiffs react immediately and manage to restrain him, but Duncan shouts several times, "I saved the blood." His voice trembles. Panic flashes in his eyes, but he is quickly seated again. He says nothing more and looks silently ahead. The judge does not comment on this episode in any way and continues reading the concluding part of his verdict. The court establishes that Claire McPherson acted under the influence of fear and suggestion, however fully recognized the consequences of her actions and actively participated in what happened. Ewan McPherson proved to be, according to the psychiatrist's assessment, a person of low intellectual level, completely subject to the influence of his wife and the elder, but nevertheless personally participated in the destruction of crime evidence. As for Duncan McPherson, his role is recognized as central. He is the initiator, organizer, and main inspirator of all events that took place. The court also emphasizes separately, despite all efforts of investigations and forensic scientists, it is impossible to determine the exact number of victims, especially those relating to the period of 2017, because of the destruction of DNA samples by time and exposure to chemical substances. Thus, the true scale of what happened may remain unknown forever. At the conclusion of the session, the judge of the Supreme Court of the Northern Territory announces the final verdict in the case. Claire McPherson is found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum serving period of 25 years. Despite mitigating circumstances of psychological pressure, the court recognized her actions as too serious to consider a lesser punishment. Duncan McPherson, recognized as the main organizer and inspirator, is sentenced to 30 years of imprisonment without the right to early release. Ewan McPherson is found guilty of active complicity in the crimes and receives 22 years of imprisonment. The judge's last sentence sounds even and dry. The exact number of victims from 2017 cannot be established. With this, the words end. The judge closes the folder with the case materials and leaves the courtroom. After him, journalists and the few spectators slowly leave the hall. The defendants are silently led away by court security officers. The McPherson farm is now closed and sealed by police. The compost pit, location of the final evidence and the most terrible discoveries, remains under special seal. The desert wind quietly and indifferently carries red dust over the lifeless property, preserving not yet revealed and possibly forever lost secrets of this grim place. Al-Bakali lived for 8 years in an apartment that hid a terrible secret. No one noticed that in an ordinary magazine ottoman the remains of the missing barista Vincenzo were hidden. This was discovered by chance by her student when she damaged the furniture with her heel during the lesson. Now the police are investigating who exactly and why had hidden Vincenzo all these years in the completely ordinary house of the music teacher. On the 16th of March 2023, an event occurred in the center of Palermo that immediately drew police attention. Al-Bakali, a 56-year-old music teacher, was conducting an ordinary lesson with a student. At some point, the girl accidentally pierced through the lid of a magazine ottoman with her heel. When the lid shifted, partially mummified remains appeared under a dense gray tarpaulin. After a few days, it became clear. It was the barista Vincenzo P., who had disappeared 6 years earlier, who was 34 years old at that time. The ottoman seemed to be part of a modular sofa, inconspicuous and well integrated into the interior. In 2019, its leg was repaired. This detail seemed important to the investigators. Inside the ottoman, investigators discovered a layer of construction silica gel, carefully laid out by hand, and remains of camphor soap, which was used to prevent odor and insect repellent. This is exactly what allowed the remains to remain unnoticed for so long. During the first interrogations, neighbors only remembered one strange episode. About 6 years earlier, a crash sounded in the middle of the night, to which no one attached significance at that time. The investigation immediately focused on 2 suspects. Al-Bakali was the last person who had seen Vincenzo alive. During questioning, she showed no anxiety and explained that Vincenzo had simply left after an evening visit. The second suspect became her neighbor, Sandro L., a 42-year-old furniture restorer. His DNA was found on the ottoman lid, and this immediately drew special attention from the Carabinieri. In the first official report, the Carabinieri suspected that exactly Sandro could have hidden Vincenzo's remains during the furniture repair. This version seemed convincing. His profession fit perfectly for such manipulation, and his DNA traces on the furniture seemed to be direct confirmation. However, this theory soon got a serious crack. The forensic expert brought clarity. The silica gel that was used to preserve the remains was placed exactly in May 2017. This was confirmed by the character of mummification and chemical analyses. But at that time, Sandro was not in Palermo. He was far from the city, and this was confirmed by official documents and witness testimonies. After refuting this version, the Carabinieri were forced to return to the beginning and check all details again. A thorough verification of Sandro's alibi and a detailed investigation of the last hours when Vincenzo was in Alba Cali's apartment began. Why did Sandro decide to repair the Ottoman leg without asking permission from its owner? In April 2019, Sandro L. took a small order from Alba Cali. It was a simple restoration of a furniture leg from an Ottoman. For the work, he issued an invoice for a small amount, 40 euros, which corresponds to standard prices for such services in Palermo. Documents from the restoration workshop, which was located on Via Roma, confirm the fact of the repair. On the work order, Alba's clearly indicated address was noted, Via Roma 218. The repair of the furniture leg itself seemed an absolutely everyday matter. But exactly this episode proved to be important for the investigation 4 years later, when Vincenzo's remains were found in the same Ottoman. During interrogation, Sandro calmly explained why he performed the repair without additional agreements with the furniture owner. "Alba asked me to fix the leg," he explained to the investigators. "The Ottoman was wobbling, causing inconvenience, and she didn't like that. I offered to do it quickly, for little money." Documents from the restoration workshop confirmed his words. Sandro had indeed received and executed the order to repair a specific leg of a specific Ottoman. The situation looked banal and was completely confirmed by receipts and work execution documents. The investigation was interested in whether Sandro could have noticed that the Ottoman hid something unusual inside. During detailed examination, it turned out that the Ottoman was specially lined inside with a plywood frame. This completely blocked visual access to the interior of the object. Sandro explained that during the repair he didn't even open the inner part, but simply reinforced the leg from the outside. Thus, he couldn't even theoretically see what was under the lid. While the investigation was clarifying facts, local media published their version. Journalists directed their attention to Sandro's habit of wearing gloves during work, and allegedly explained this as an attempt to hide fingerprints. However, Sandro himself presented a medical certificate about an allergy to chemical substances that are widespread in furniture varnishes and paints. The allergy was confirmed by documents from an allergist that were obtained long before the events, which greatly weakened the media uproar around this assumption. Nevertheless, this trace was preliminarily marked by the investigation as awaiting verification. Just when the version with Sandro seemed almost completely excluded, an official discharge letter came from the hospital in the city of Bari. According to the documents, Sandro was in another city from the 11th to the 15th of May 2017 and underwent a planned surgical operation. Medical records and official papers were convincing, and the Carabinieri received confirmations that excluded his physical presence in Palermo during the period when Vincenzo's remains were presumably hidden. The obtained documents and witness testimonies practically completely lifted the suspicions against Sandro L. His personality moved to the background. However, one unclear point remained for the investigators. Why did Alba give exactly this Ottoman to Sandro for repair, considering that the furniture hid a secret inside that could have been easily discovered? The police postponed the version with Sandro's involvement and reserved the right to return to it if necessary. Why were Vincenzo's friends sure that he had gone to work on a cruise ship, although officially the contract was never signed? On the 13th of May 2017, Vincenzo's friends were supposed to gather for a traditional meeting in a bar near the center of Palermo. This was an informal farewell party. At least it seemed so at that time. Vincenzo repeatedly told acquaintances about plans to start working on a cruise ship for the company Costa Cruises. But on the morning after the party, Vincenzo didn't show up. The acquaintances weren't worried. Everyone knew about his intention to travel. When the police years later conducted a deep check of Vincenzo's email accounts, it became understandable why none of the friends raised alarm. 2 days after Vincenzo's disappearance, his electronic mail sent a resume to the personnel department of the cruise company Costa Cruises HR. After this sending, the mail automatically activated an autoresponder, whose text was brief but clear. I'm on board, working on the ship. Lavoro in neve. The auto-response was activated at 8:12 World Time UTC-2 as if Vincenzo was already at sea. Apparently, Vincenzo's friends saw exactly this auto-response and were not surprised by his sudden disappearance. He always dreamed of the sea, of new impressions, the friends later told the police. We were sure that he was already on the ship. He often said that he would leave soon. The investigation could not ignore the key question. Who exactly could have set up the auto-response from Vincenzo's mail? According to the report of the technical department of the Carabinieri, the activation of the autoresponder was performed from an IP address that belonged to Alba Cali's apartment. The question of to what extent Vincenzo could have made this setting independently remained under the careful observation of the Carabinieri. The technical expert explained that activating the autoresponder required logging into the account, specifying a concrete text, and confirming the changes. Considering the situation, the action itself looked simple, but was crucial for creating the appearance of a departure. After the information was published in the press, the version quickly emerged that Vincenzo might have intentionally staged his disappearance. Publications suggested that he could deliberately create the illusion of leaving on a ship to actually work under the table, that is, unofficially, without leaving traces in documents and tax reports. Such a practice on cruise ships, especially among low-paid employees, actually existed, which made this theory quite plausible at first glance. However, investigators left it open until checking official data from the company. When the investigators' inquiry finally reached the office of Costa Cruises, an official letter came from the company's HR department. The document stated directly, Costa Cruises has not concluded any contract with citizen Vincenzo P. He did not undergo the medical examination that is mandatory for all company employees. Accordingly, he could not have been on any of our ships during the specified period. This official paper became an important turning point. The theory that Vincenzo staged the disappearance and was working somewhere unofficially received a serious gap. Now the police were forced to once again direct their attention to the key location where Vincenzo was last seen, Alba Cali's apartment. After the version of voluntary departure on a cruise ship proved untenable, it became clear. The key to solving the mystery of Vincenzo's disappearance lay precisely in that apartment, from where the autoresponder was also set up. The investigation decided to once again reconstruct in detail the circumstances of that night and clarify the events directly in the apartment of music teacher Alba Cali. Why was Alba's blood found on the Ottoman's leg and not Vincenzo's? On the 18th of March, 2023, the forensic team came again to Alba Cali's apartment on Via Belmonte. They intended to conduct an additional examination of the Ottoman that concealed Vincenzo's remains inside. The expert's attention was immediately drawn to a small dried blood drop on the furniture leg that had been repaired earlier. The sample was sent for urgent analysis to the Carabinieri laboratory. The result was unexpected. The blood belonged to Alba Cali, owner of the rare blood type O-negative. Additional analysis showed the presence of microscopic steel shaving particles. According to the criminalist's conclusion, this proved that the injury was received precisely at the moment of working with a furniture screw, a so-called confirmat of size 7x90. Such screws were widely used in furniture assembly in the time of 2017. The examination of the furniture with photographic fixation fully confirmed the expert's conclusions. The screw, confirmat 7x90, was clearly visible in the photo of the Ottoman fastening. The experts had no doubt. Alba cut herself precisely when screwing in this fastener. The Carabinieri immediately checked the reality of the physical scenario in which Alba could have independently placed the remains inside the furniture and moved them without outside help. The weight of the ottoman with the remains inside was about 63 kilograms. Taking into account the frame and plywood construction, the total weight reached almost 90 kilograms. Experts in mechanics and kinematics explained in detail to the investigators. With proper use of auxiliary materials, particularly an ordinary blanket and the lever principle, a woman even of not the strongest constitution can independently move. Such a weight. Additional proof of the physical scenario were clearly fixed scratches on the parquet of Alba's apartment that corresponded to the direction of the ottoman's movement from the entrance door to its final placement point. Meanwhile, an alternative version emerged in the press. Alba could have injured herself later in 2019 by accident, already after the ottoman had been used as a hiding place. In this case, the blood could have appeared during repairs when Sandro unscrewed the lid to reinforce the furniture leg. The version looked plausible exactly until the moment when the forensic laboratory presented new microscopy data. The analysis showed that the degree of blood oxidation clearly indicated the date of its appearance, May 2017. This conclusion completely destroyed the hypothesis about the later occurrence of the injury. The key evidence of blood oxidation tied to May 2017 called into question Alba's own statements about the events of that night. Now the investigation had to return again to the key moments of that evening. If Alba cut herself when closing the ottoman precisely in May 2017, it means she interacted directly with it on the day of Vincenzo's disappearance. Now the Carabinieri were forced to thoroughly investigate Alba's behavior and the circumstances of that night once again. The situation changed drastically. The investigation could no longer ignore Alba's connection with the moment of Vincenzo's disappearance and the appearance of the hiding furniture in her apartment. How did Vincenzo's visit regarding the old laptop and deposit end? On the 12th of May 2017 at 19 hours, Vincenzo sent Alba Kali a short message via messenger. Alle 19 passo da te. I'm coming to you at 7. That evening, Vincenzo wanted to pick up the old laptop and get back the money he had earlier left with Alba as a deposit for room rental. At the time of this visit, Alba and Vincenzo were no longer communicating closely and avoided unnecessary contacts. Around 7 in the evening, the neighbor in the stairwell, pensioner Lucia M., heard from Alba's apartment a short but quite loud conflict. Lucia clearly heard a male voice demanding the return of money. What financial conflict occurred between Alba and Vincenzo even before his move-out? On the 10th of December 2016, Alba Kali received a sharp message from Vincenzo. Ti denunzio all'Agenzia delle Entrate se non mi restituisci subito I soldi. In translation, this meant, I'll report you to the tax authority if you don't immediately return my money. This message became the first recorded threat that directly connected Alba with possible problems with tax authorities. Precisely this message opened the investigation's understanding that money matters between Vincenzo and Alba had been dragging on long before the tragic events of May 2017. The investigators checked Alba Kali's financial documents for 2016 and found that she had officially declared absolutely no income. However, it was known to everyone that Alba regularly gave music lessons at home, accepting payment only in cash and never issuing receipts. In Palermo, such a practice was widespread, though illegal. Any conflict could lead to serious consequences. There was also no official rental contract between Alba and Vincenzo. Their financial relationship was based exclusively on oral agreement, which was legally permissible if the rent lasted less than a month. However, Vincenzo had already been living in Alba's apartment for 8 months, and this created additional difficulties related to money and taxes. The investigators were particularly interested in the question of the existence of a rental contract. The absence of a written document was fully confirmed. Alba explained that she never considered it necessary to officially record their agreements, and Vincenzo, according to her words, also never demanded written confirmation. This created an unprotected position for both sides and made Alba vulnerable to a possible tax inspection audit. After the SMS with the threat became known to the press, the version emerged that Vincenzo was deliberately blackmailing Alba, threatening tax consequences to obtain a large sum of money from her. Moreover, the hypothesis sounded that Vincenzo was alive and successfully hiding with the money. This version did not last long. The police requested bank statements from Vincenzo and found that after the 12th of May 2017, his bank card was not activated a single time. They also discovered that the deposit of 600 euros, which caused the conflict, had not been returned to him by Alba Kali. Thus, the version that Vincenzo was hiding somewhere with money officially fell away. The bank report showed that Vincenzo's deposit of 600 euros remained with Alba Kali, although she always claimed to have returned the money before the conflict. The absence of activity on Vincenzo's bank card since the date of his disappearance pointed investigators directly to the fact that he could not have used his money or voluntarily gone anywhere. Thus, the financial motive of the conflict, which earlier seemed abstract, acquired completely concrete outlines. Money, blackmail, and the threat of a tax audit became that key element which investigators began to take seriously. Now the investigation decided to return again to Alba herself, her words and her behavior directly on the night of Vincenzo's disappearance. After this phrase, silence ensued. Lucia heard neither fighting noise nor other conflict sounds. But the fact of the financial dispute was recorded. Precisely this brief testimony of the neighbor became an important point of the investigation. The Carabinieri tried to find out whether Vincenzo had brought the laptop when he went to Alba. There were no surveillance cameras in the stairwell. The only witness remained Lucia, who remembered that Vincenzo held a yellow bag of medium size in his hands. Whether the laptop was there, the woman could not specify. The search of Alba's apartment conducted by police after the discovery of the remains, according to search warrant number 122/2023 of the Palermo prosecutor's office, yielded no results. Vincenzo's laptop was found nowhere, neither among Alba's things nor in other rooms of the apartment. One of the investigators suspected that there might have been information in the laptop that compromised Alba, and precisely for this reason, the laptop disappeared. Alba herself denied the presence of compromising material and assured that she had no idea where the device had gone. The theory remained temporarily only a hypothesis and was accepted by the investigation for further verification. In subsequent search actions, it became obvious. The laptop disappeared definitively and without trace. The device that could have clarified the conflict and Vincenzo's disappearance was found neither with Alba nor with anyone else. Its absence remained an important, unsolved link in the chain of events of that evening. The investigators decided to check the nearest pawn shops and electronics reception points on Via Maqueda. Devices of dubious origin often appeared there. The Carabinieri suspected that Vincenzo could have disposed of the laptop for money before visiting Alba. Who carried out the bloody blanket that was mentioned in the investigators' theory, if the blanket itself was never found? After the financial motives of the conflict between Alba and Vincenzo gained clarity, the investigation returned to the details of the disappearance of material evidence. The central puzzle remained the disappeared blanket, on which presumably important traces were located. Despite thorough examination of Alba's apartment, it was not possible to find this blanket. On the 5th of April 2023, the Carabinieri received archival records from the AMIA company, which was responsible for garbage collection in Palermo. In the logbook of the garbage truck, an unusual detail was recorded. In the early morning of the 15th of May 2017, an unscheduled overload of the container occurred, which was located on Via Roma, Isolato 4. This container was located very close to Alba's apartment. The garbage truck driver Gianni R. confirmed to the investigation that on that night, more precisely around 5 o'clock in the morning, a woman was at the container. He saw her only for a few seconds but remembered her well. She carried a rather large rolled-up fabric roll, carelessly wrapped, and was obviously in a hurry to get rid of it. Gianni, according to his words, paid no attention to this and attributed it to a domestic situation. The investigators asked Gianni whether he could identify the woman by face. The driver could not confirm the identity with complete certainty as 8 years had passed. Nevertheless, he clearly described her appearance. The woman was thin, dark-skinned. Her hair was tied in a ponytail. The description completely matched Alba Khalil's appearance from 8 years ago. Earlier, the investigation suspected the presence of an accomplice with Alba, a man who helped her deal with the heavy object and eliminate the evidence. However, Gianni's statements completely excluded the possibility of another person's presence. The garbage truck driver clearly explained that a woman was alone at the container. The theory about a male accomplice fell apart. The Carabinieri wanted to check garbage remains from the containers of 2017 to try to find biological traces and evidence, but the request for DNA search proved impossible. The garbage from that night had long been destroyed and all physical traces were completely lost. This meant that the investigation could not obtain direct material evidence that precisely Alba disposed of the bloody blanket. The accomplice, although rejected by the witness, remained formally in the status of an unconfirmed hypothesis and required final conclusion in the subsequent investigation. The investigation focused again on the murder weapon, since direct evidence in the form of the disappeared blanket no longer existed. The absence of this important material evidence complicated the investigation, but opened new possibilities and forced the police to thoroughly examine Alba's apartment and the objects in it again to identify the weapon that was used on that fateful evening. Would the microparticles from the suspected murder weapon match objects from Alba's apartment? On the 20th of November 2023, forensic experts completed one of the key procedures of the investigation: the study of microscopic particles found on Vincenzo's skull. The investigation had long suspected that a heavy metallic object served as the murder weapon, but until this moment there were no direct material confirmations. On this day, black cast iron fragments were extracted from a small crack in the skull. The experts immediately transferred the samples for detailed spectrometric analysis to determine the metal composition. In parallel, the investigators conducted a renewed examination of Alba's apartment, focusing on furnishing objects that could have left such particles. Among the musical instruments and books on the shelf, the investigators directed their attention to an old mechanical metronome, Whitner Tactel 3. The metronome's stand was made of cast iron, and one of the fragments was obviously missing from it. The experts immediately checked whether the metronome's metal could match the samples found on Vincenzo's remains. For this, thorough spectrometry was conducted. The analysis results proved significant. The composition of the metronome cast iron included 94% iron and about 2% carbon. The match with the fragments extracted from the skull crack was more than 99.2%. The experts had to specify to what extent such a match is rare and significant. The forensic expert confirmed to the investigation that the probability of accidental coincidence of such a precise cast iron composition with other objects is minimal. This testified that the metronome stand was almost certainly that weapon which was used against Vincenzo. However, Alba's defense immediately reacted to the expert results and presented their version of events. The lawyer suggested that the metronome could have accidentally fallen even before the tragic incident, which would explain the damage to its stand and the found microparticles. This version became a temporary lifeline for Alba and gave her defense a certain margin for maneuver. But the investigation was not completely satisfied with this explanation and continued deeper expertise. Soon after, the experts made another important discovery. On the inner edge of the metronome stand, micro blood drops belonging to Vincenzo were discovered. This discovery significantly undermined the version of the accidental fall of the device. Now the accident version was under serious threat and balancing on the edge of complete refutation. The investigation began preparing an official charge against Alba Khalil. All collected evidence, including the results of the cast iron analysis and the presence of blood on the suspected murder weapon, was to become part of the indictment. Nevertheless, the investigators still maintained a neutral tone in evaluating their conclusions, leaving the final word to the court. On the 5th of June 2024, the Court d'Assises di Palermo made a decision in the Alba Khalil case. Alba was found guilty of omicidio preterintenzionale, murder committed without premeditated intent, and subsequent concealment of Vincenzo P.S. remains. No loud exclamations or emotional screams sounded in the courtroom, only a brief pause after the verdict announcement. A dry and formal moment. During the court proceedings, the complete chain of events that began on the evening of the 12th of May 2017 was reconstructed. The investigation clearly established that between Alba and Vincenzo that evening, a dispute arose over the unreturned deposit of €600 and Vincenzo's threats to contact the tax authorities. It was then that Alba struck him one, but strong blow with the heavy cast-iron metronome stand that stood on her shelf. This single blow proved fatal. When Alba realized the consequences of her act, she took thorough measures to hide the traces of the crime. She placed Vincenzo's remains in the magazine ottoman and carefully sprinkled them with construction silica gel that had been purchased shortly before at the Brico Center. To mask possible odors, Alba added camphor soap, which helped her keep the hiding place unnoticed all the subsequent years. Then Alba took Vincenzo's laptop and sent a resume to the cruise company Costa Cruises, activated the auto-reply to create the illusion that he had left Palermo of his own will. Her next step was mechanical and cold. She fastened the ottoman lid with screws, accidentally cut herself in the process, and carefully wiped away all blood traces. On the night of the 15th of May, Alba disposed of the soiled blanket in a garbage container on Via Roma, which was later testified to by the garbage truck journal and driver Gianni. During the closing session, Alba's defense tried to present her actions as a result of sudden panic, a mental breakdown caused by threats of tax audits and financial pressure. However, the judge firmly rejected this argumentation, explaining that Alba's actions were consistent and completely conscious. Alba herself spoke no word, only looked silently at the floor and met neither the judge's gaze nor the investigators. After the judge's final word, a brief, heavy silence hung in the courtroom. Alba Kali was sentenced to 18 years of imprisonment. With this, the investigation is considered closed.